Federal Reserve Board Chairman Ben Bernanke was taken to task yesterday on Capitol Hill over Bank of America's Merrill Lynch takeover. His grilling has fueled speculation about the central bank's future after a regulatory overhaul. To weigh in on this and other Fed issues, we have a reporters' roundtable in place and ready to go. Bloomberg's Michael McKee and Kathleen Hayes are with me here in New York, and Scott Lanman joins us from our bureau in Washington. And Scott, let me start with you. How does Mr. Bernanke's discourse with legislators yesterday affect his chances of a second term? That's been all of the rage in Washington for the past week or so.
Well, it doesn't seem to help so much if you were watching it. On the other hand, it hasn't seemed to hurt that much either. We monitor this website called InTrade, and people trade futures on whether Bernanke will get reappointed. That dropped from about a 70% chance of reappointment to 61% today. We also heard from Valerie Jarrett, a senior advisor to Obama, who said that Bernanke did very well in his testimony yesterday. So it's not like it's been totally scuttled yet, but it didn't help a great deal either.
And our economics editor, Michael McKee, standing by. And Mike, you saw the testimony yesterday, and as I was speaking to Peter Cook, they took the gloves off a little bit. They took Mr. Bernanke to task, and some people seemed like they were trying to box him in, but he would not say that he threatened anyone during that whole Bank of America Merrill scenario.
Well, and here's the thing, Mark. If they do not prove any kind of criminal conduct, there's not really much that's going to come out of this. And in Washington, memories are very short. So Bernanke has until January 31st before his term expires. By the time Obama gets around to deciding on who the next Fed chairman is, this may have really faded from memory. What it may affect more is the debate about the regulator, the systemic risk regulator, and whether or not the Fed gets a chance to be that under Obama's regulatory scheme. Republicans are interested in derailing that, apparently, and maybe they're just using him as a punching bag at this moment.
And Kathleen, I know you have been talking about the systemic risk regulator and also the discussion about the Fed's chances of getting more power to regulate in the financial system, something that the Republicans in Congress say they are wholeheartedly against.
Well, it's almost like there's a couple of separate questions here. Number one, do you want to have one uber regulator? There are those who say that we have lots of regulators in place, and a systemic risk regulator, uber regulator, would make the difference. What you really need to do to reform the banks is to set rules that banks can't cross certain lines and prevent another financial crisis that way. But, you know, the question particularly of the Fed, if the Congress wants to go down that path, the question they're going to have to answer, if you don't make the Fed to reserve the uber regulator, who do you make it? And then if it's not the Fed, if it's someone from Treasury, that's a political appointment. The thing about the Federal Reserve is they are viewed as independent central bankers. Whether you want one regulator or not, there's probably a lot of people on Wall Street who would feel more comfortable with someone like the Fed regulating the big banks than someone from Treasury, again, who would be so subject to the whims of Congress and White House.
And let me jump in here.
Yeah.
Even though the Fed, there is a lot of opposition on Capitol Hill to making the Fed the uber regulator, as we just said. It's not that it's definitely not going to happen that way. It could still happen, but there could be new constraints on the Fed and on its independence. Treasury's already proposed that there be a Treasury sign-off on Fed use of emergency powers, and there's other talk of things such as presidential appointment and Senate confirmation of the 12 Federal Reserve Bank presidents who are currently appointed by the boards of directors of each district there.
Yeah, a legislature dropped a bill on that subject into the hopper today up on Capitol Hill, although, Scott, I would imagine that's probably got the least chance of going anywhere of all the plans to talk about what happens to the Fed.
You know, I just want to say... Yesterday, I believe it was, I spoke to Henry Kaufman here on Bloomberg Television. You know, he was Dr. Doom back in the 80s for forecasting higher interest rates. But anyway, a long track record as a Fed watcher, a Wall Street economist. Henry says it's time. The Federal Reserve was set up in 1913 to have something like a commission to really look at the Fed, its structure, and not to say the Fed's bad or good, but to say what are the financial markets like right now. Things are much more sophisticated, they're different, and really take a bottom to top and top to bottom look at what the Fed should be and what the structure should be.
And again, Kathleen, you know, there's that legislation that's pending. It's got a whole bunch of co-signers. Folks in Congress are pretty mad. They want more transparency from the Fed. They want to see what's going on here.
And I assume you're referring there, Mark, to the audit bill that was introduced
Absolutely.
by Ron Paul.
Yes.
To have the GAO do a full audit of the Fed by the end of next year. That does have a majority of House members co-sponsoring it. Whether it actually does become law is another question, but it does give that faction in Congress a lot of leverage to get more transparency out of the Fed, and it would be hard to believe that we won't get some greater transparency or GAO audits when this is all said and done.
Mike, what's next in this BofA-Merrill investigation? Does this have legs? We haven't seen the end of this, have we?
Well, we haven't seen the end of it because there are more people to testify. Hank Paulson's been called in and says he will talk to the committee, so we're going to get another piñata session probably with Mr. Paulson getting beat up over who said what to whom and who threatened whom. But right now they don't seem to have come up with anything illegal that they could refer to the Justice Department. Until they do that, unless they do that, it's probably not going to have legs beyond the end of the summer. And we're going to get into some major legislative heavy lifting with the health care legislation, with the Fed and super regulatory legislation coming up, all the foreign policy things on the president's agenda. This could easily fade from people's minds once the summer's over.
Kathleen, today Alan Greenspan in a piece in the Financial Times saying that inflation is the biggest threat to recovery. Is that what Mr. Bernanke has to focus in on now?
Mr. Bernanke has to focus on maintaining the Fed's credibility as a true inflation fighter. There are certainly those outside the Fed, Alan Greenspan now raising that flag, that are concerned that the Fed's going to be very nimble. But the Fed already gave us that signal in the last couple of days that it realizes it's going to have to shrink its balance sheet. It's been talking about that for the longest time. The Fed thinks it can do it. This Bernanke Fed says it can and it will. But there are certainly a lot of naysayers out there, including Alan Meltzer, wrote a big history of the Fed. You know, Scott and Mike know Alan very well, and he's convinced that under the kind of political pressure this Fed's going to face to start raising interest rates when unemployment may still be high, that they're going to wither. They're not going to be up to it. That's what Bernanke and co. have to show the world they can do.
Our Fed Roundtable this afternoon, Michael McKee, Kathleen Hayes, Scott Lanman, thank you all very much.